Okay, this podcast is a continuation of the last conversation I had with my friend Keri Mangis. If you did not hear that episode, Keri was preparing to deliver a TEDx talk in Minneapolis, and now she has done it. So Keri is back to tell us how it went and what she learned. You're listening to Courageous Wordsmith. I'm Amy Hallberg, author, editor, and creative mentor, and these are conversations with real-life creatives on how we find and embody our voices. Because if you want to be a real-life creative, it helps to know what that looks like for you. Welcome to Courageous Wordsmith. Welcome back, Keri.
Thank you, Amy. So glad to be back.
So you're now on the other side of this TED Talk. Will you remind us what your topic was about?
Yes. So my topic was about menopause as a rite of passage. So not treating it like a pathology, not treating it like a disease, not treating it like an ending, but making it sacred through acknowledgement, through recognition, and even through ceremony.
Okay, and speaking of words that you speak with intention and a bit of ceremony, how was it? How was the TED Talk?
It was, Amy, a top 10 life experience. And that is, this is going to be one of those things that I look back on with pride and joy for the rest of my life.
And I love that you think so, because you were going into it thinking that it was really important. I love that it satisfied that dream for you. Obviously, it's not the end of the dream. To me, it feels like it's a beginning of a dream. What was it like?
Oh, wow. There's something about standing underneath those lights. Like you do all of these months of preparation, as you and I have talked about. There's just months and months of preparation and rehearsal. And then you're there and the moment comes. And I'm in this place of menopause, right? And one of the symptoms of menopause apparently is this memory that doesn't work quite the same as it used to. And so, can I trust myself? Can I trust my brain? Can I trust my practices? And I had a lot of people supporting me from TEDx directly, and also just friends like yourself who kept telling me to just trust myself. And you get up there, you say those first few sentences and you say, you know what? I do have this. And the fear drops. I mean, that's what I found about this is the fear elevated and elevated and elevated. And then once I was on stage, the fear dropped. And it just gives way to this joy. There is nothing like, Amy, you and I are writers. And so we spend a lot of our time behind the keyboard, right? And we spend a lot of time hoping that our words are landing, hoping that people are responding and reacting to our words. But people don't always give us the comment or give us the like. People are busy. Well, being on stage in front of people is just the opposite of that. Finally, you get to see people's reactions with every sentence, with every joke. You get to see how things land. You get to see people react in real time. And what a balm that is on a writer's lonely soul.
I mean, I saw you before. I ran into you in the lobby. So you were performing at Orchestra Hall, which, back in the day, I've sung on that stage. That is an impressive building, right? So what is it like to be standing on, this is the home of the Minnesota Orchestra. This is big things have been presented there. And you're standing there and there's this big sign, like a 3D sculpture sign that says TEDx Minneapolis on the stage with you, right? Like what were you noticing all those details,
No.
the lights, everything, or what do you remember from just standing on that stage?
Yes. So apparently the lighting glitched when I first started. And yes, and as you know, my microphone glitched a little later, but apparently the lighting glitched and somebody asked me if I noticed that. And I said, absolutely not. You are so single-minded about the task ahead. What I focused on most was that walk out Because if you remember the way the
Mm.
stage was set up, we walked out from stage right. The
Mm-hmm.
red carpet was closer to stage left.
Oh.
And yeah, and so it was a significant walk. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
I practiced that beforehand in two different pairs of shoes because I wanted to know that was something that I didn't practice at home, right? And that's important. And so I asked my coaches if I could have a little time before the doors opened to just practice the walk and practice being on that carpet in two different pairs of shoes because I didn't want anything to distract from everything else that mattered so much more. So
I
yeah, so at some point I was out there, yes, beforehand. One foot in one shoe, one foot in the other, trying it out. And making sure that, were these hardwoods, were they slippery? Were they, easy to walk on? Were they going to make a lot of noise? What could I expect from that? So I could just take out all of the potential unknowns.
and you kind of hinted at this, but to make it explicit, you had no notes. This was entirely from memory. Yeah?
Right. Yes. Uh-huh. And I tell you again, like this summer I was hyper focused on memorizing this. But what I learned, Amy, because I've never had to memorize something like this. I was never an actor. I never did anything where I had to memorize lines. I have a whole new respect
Right.
for people who do.
Right.
But what I learned is that at some point, it's no longer about a repetition of words. It's a repetition of a rhythm, right? And so, where I would have pauses, where I would raise my voice, where I would drop, all of that became like a backdrop that I could just repeat over and over again, maybe like your favorite song. And that to
Mm-hmm.
me, going forward to anybody who ever is looking at doing something like this, that's how I'd look at it. You're not going to
Yeah.
memorize words, you're going to memorize a rhythm. And then you're just going to repeat it.
Find the musicality. Find the musicality in it, right?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
That's so cool.
Well, that's what
Um,
made it just so enlightening and something that I'd never experienced before. And again, hats off to all of you out there that are actors that deliver lines on stage. I just, it's an incredible feat.
mhm. So, so you're telling us about getting on stage, but so I remember from this show, like I'm out there, I'm sitting in the audience, I see you and I say, "Hey, Keri, how you doing? When are you going?" Because there was a printed program, there was a QR code, but I didn't find that, right? So I walk in and I like don't know when this is, and I ask you, and you said you were the first speaker after intermission, which means you have a long time to wait while everybody else
Hmm.
is getting going. So what were you doing during that whole first act and intermission?
Yes, well, that was part of my preparation was to be taking care of myself because they did have everybody else's talks going and you could watch them, but I knew that that wasn't the right thing for me to be doing. As
Mm-hmm.
fascinated as I am by everybody else's talk, I needed to stay in my own space. And so they have these rooms backstage that are soundproof.
Mm.
And I would just spend my time in there. I practiced one time, but my coach told me I forbid you from practicing within an hour of your talk. She said, "You know it, you've got it, no more beating yourself over the head with it."
Mm-hmm.
So, between that and a fair amount of pacing, I logged a lot of miles that day backstage.
That's such a good point about not doing it an hour before you show up because you do not want to be introducing things into your short-term memory. You actually want to
Right.
keep that speech clean in your long-term memory. You don't want to be
Yes.
futzing with it right before you go on. And you were one of 7 people. Plus, there were a couple of musical acts to go with it. So, like, those were interesting topics. And they talked about how the whole overarching theme was life rewritten. How much did but you didn't really, you said you didn't actually practice with these people. You weren't actually aware of what their speeches really were. So how much did that impact you? How much did that impact you knowing that there was this bigger theme when you didn't necessarily have the bigger context and won't, from what I understand, until it's released? You won't be able to watch these speeches until everybody else does when it's released on online.
I think that was sort of the beauty of this, was that they really allowed us to practice and focus on our own individual journey, not comparing ourselves to where others were, for instance, which I think in hindsight was quite wise, because some of us are going to learn a little quicker, some of us are going to take a little bit more time, but we were not pitted against each other, at any point in time to say, oh, well, you have yours memorized, but you still don't. So I think that was really important for the mindset of all of us as individuals. I did love how, and the process of TEDx Minneapolis, and every TEDx has its own process. So this is a statement just about the way TEDx Minneapolis did this. They selected their speakers first, and then they created the theme that tied them all together. And
Mm,
I thought, how beautiful and magical to not be going into the audition process, right? Trying to find talks that meet a theme.
right.
Yeah. And so when I saw Life Rewritten, first of all, I knew how perfectly that matched my talk.
Mm,
Definitely. And then
yeah.
as I got to know the thesis of the other people's talks, I understood how it really did carry us all together. And if there was one word that almost every single one of us speakers said multiple times, it was stigma.
Interesting.
All of
Okay.
us in different ways said the word stigma. And that,
Yeah.
to me, tells you all you need to know about what that night was about.
What's interesting is now you say that, I'm like, oh, well, they must have done, right? But I remember one speaker who really, really highlighted that. And what was interesting to me about that talk, which people can watch for themselves, I'm not going to give away what it is, but that was somebody who his family was connected to a story that showed up in the news around which there was a lot of stigma. So to me, it was fascinating to see this person come from that what current event news item thing and tell you, hey, here's what was really happening in the background. And here's the stigma that came out of it. And here's what I did. And I think everybody was in their own way looking at here's what I have done to face that stigma. And the stigma can be paralyzing, you know,
Mm.
but so
Yes.
important to talk about these different topics that came up, every single one of them. I was only fair, full disclosure, I was only there for 5 of the talks, but cuz I was tired and I had to go pack to go out of town. But so I
Yes,
missed the last
yes.
two, but I caught 5 of them and it was like every single one I was like, yeah, we should be talking about this. Yeah, we should be
Mm.
talking about this too, right? Like these are things we need to talk about it and we don't.
Hmm.
Not nearly enough.
Right. Yep. And I think that's what was so fun about delivering the talk, is seeing, you could almost see the relief and the joy and the enthusiasm on people's faces to talk about menopause openly. And I didn't know how people would respond to this. I didn't know if people would like some of the jokes I put in there. I didn't know if the men were going to stick with me. All of these unknowns when you go up
Mhm,
there.
mhm.
And yet it was exactly as I hoped. I mean, there was participation, there was joy, there was smiles. I saw some women nudging each other and kind of whispering in each other's ears. I felt so honored to get to be the one to cultivate whatever conversations came out of my talk. I love that.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you about that. Like, what are some of the responses that you got to your talk, and maybe some of them that surprised you?
Mm. Well, so one of the key pinnacles of my talk was that we honor menopause by declaring a pause day.
Right.
And that pause day would be our day of true menopause, that day when we haven't had a period for 365 days. That's
Hmm.
technically menopause. I'm suggesting we call that our pause day. We create a little ceremony around it. We make it a true transition. What was fun was to hear people talking about their pause day in the after party or in text messages where people would say, my pause day is coming, or, is hopefully coming up. I'm on day 360. I'm so close to my pause day. To hear people use the terminology that I introduced and to make it
Hmm.
their own,
Hmm.
that's the mirror you get back. That just, it's the purpose of all of it.
Well, and I think every woman's story is going to be different, but at the same time, it's a universal thing for women at the same time.
Right.
So, and even you were like, well, what if, for whatever reason, you don't know? You could choose, you suggested you could choose a meaningful marker. Say you don't know when it was 365 days since you last bled for whatever reason. You offered some suggestions. What were those suggestions again?
Right. Yeah, you're pretty much right there, is to create that date from something meaningful, something else that for you connotes this transition between adulthood and elderhood. So maybe, for everybody it would be different, right? The easiest way is to make it around that date that you last bled, but you could make it around a day you last took your kids to school, or the day you last drove a car, or the day, something, anything that for you marks this transition into a new stage of life.
I mean, Keri, I'm going to tell you for me, because I had twins and everything was managed for me after that, the hormone stuff. So, like, I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you that this is maybe too much information, but what the heck? The day that I went to my doctor and she took the Nexplanon out of my arm, and I was like, am I through menopause? And she said, I don't know. And she sent me down to the labs, and the lab confirmed that, yes, you are done. So for me, it would be the day I went to the lab and the lab test said, there you go. And I think it's fun, right? And nobody else has that story. Like, nobody, I don't know, but I definitely feel like this stage of life is a very different stage of life than the previous one. And what a great way to highlight the fact that those of us who have been through those previous life stages have a lot of wisdom, and we got time to share it now.
Yes, exactly. But none of that can happen if we don't acknowledge that we have transitioned. If we are so hungry to hang on to our youth, which is, of course,
Hmm.
what the culture promotes, then we'll
Hmm.
never actually be able to claim our gifts of mentorship or guidance or storytelling or all of the other things that elders in indigenous societies do all the time.
Right. Little gonna go off on a tangent here. I remember somebody using the word elderly to refer to women in menopause or past menopause. And I was like, I'm not elderly, okay? And they were like, well, elder and elderly, they're the same root. And I'm like, no, they're not, because one of them
No.
connotes um, old, feeble, no longer able to perform well in society. Respectfully, I think that I'm in some ways better than I've ever been. And
Mm.
I feel that I could contribute more than I ever have. So I love that word elder, which is very different from elderly. And personally, over here, I'm also reclaiming the word crone. Um,
Yes.
I don't have to be a young thing, but trust me, I got things to offer. And I know you do too. Which leads me to this next question of, okay, so you did this TED talk. That's not the end of it, right? That's the beginning.
Mm. So, the best feedback I got after my talk was from my coach, who I'd been working with since spring. And she offered her feedback and her thoughts on the evening. And then she said, I think for you, this TED Talk is itself a rite of passage.
Mm,
And I am holding those words so close to my heart because I believe that to be true. That this is my opportunity to kind of move through yet another another space of a rebirth into being a speaker because of the joy that I found on that stage. It takes me back a little, Amy, to my days of teaching yoga and
Mm.
being able to be one on one with people and in group with other people and to offer ideas to other people in real time. And so I am hopeful that once this talk goes live, it brings new, fresh opportunities to my door, whether they be on menopause specifically or on rites of passage in general. I am happy to take this message and continue spreading it.
I just like to take us back a little moment to how you and I met because we were writers. We were on our first books. And when I met you, and I had just come from teaching, I didn't, I was, I'd been burned by teaching. I didn't want to be a teacher, but of course I am a teacher. And I think that's what I recognized in you. I think we saw each other. It was a little small group, and I don't even remember who the other people were in the group. But I remember that you and I were in there, and I was like, oh, she's a teacher. And you taught me some ideas that I had never even thought to think about, right? Like that when I'm framing how I think about things today, a lot of that goes back to, oh, I met Keri and she introduced the word patriarchy to me. And there were some other things too, right? Like you are a teacher at your
Mm.
core and you are a writer. And so when you think about a TED Talk, which is all about ideas with impact, this is what you were doing. Now, when you were cast in this TED Talk, I thought, you thought you were writing a book. You have a book that's like on the way to publication, like it's
Yeah.
largely written, but you took a break from that book to do this TED Talk. What does this TED Talk make possible for that book?
Oh, okay. So I just love this question because my book is titled The Essential Ingredient: Remaking Ourselves in Times of Crisis.
Mhm.
And it is a book about how to make the best of our breakdowns, to spend time in these in between spaces, what I call the liminal stages. And it's about the rebirths in our lives, personally and collectively.
Mhm.
At first blush, someone might think, well, that book doesn't have anything to do with menopause. These two topics are really different.
Mhm.
And yet, the way that I see it is that menopause is the microcosm, right? The small reflection of the bigger idea. So, if the bigger idea is that we go through these cycles of life, of breakdown and liminal and rebirth, and
Mhm.
that we do this both individually and collectively, and that we do it multiple times in a lifetime, well,
Right.
one of those times is menopause.
Uh-huh.
So, the way that I see this, and the reason that I paused the book is because getting a TED Talk obviously is always such an honor, and you're probably going to do that. But because as people start to see the example of menopause being a rite of passage, then it makes possible the idea that maybe, well, there are all kinds of rites of passage in our lives. And there are all
Mhm.
kinds of ways that we move through cycles and breakdowns. And maybe, just maybe, our evolution is not dependent on us constantly improving, constantly reaching upward and outward, constantly picking ourselves up by the bootstraps. Maybe, just maybe, our evolution is dependent on our breakdowns because it's the only way we can break out of old molds, old conditioning, and old status quos. It's the only way that we can break stigma.
And when you put it that way, Keri, what comes to mind is that you and I have talked about this before, but we in America, in American society, particularly us white people, I'm just going to say that, we are lacking in rites of passage. They just don't, it's almost like there's stigma around the rites of passage, right?
Oh,
And
it's
that
perfectly
we're
said.
looking at this malaise in our society. There's a hunger for that cyclical nature that we have abandoned. Like, we deny it's there, but it is part of us. We are seasonal beings. And that some of what we're trying to get back to is something that helps us to make meaning. So,
Yes.
what if these rites of passage are actually an antidote to something much, much bigger? And we try to come up with policies, and those policies are important. But when you miss the humanity of things, I
Mm.
think we suffer.
Well, the one thing that white people have always been so quick to do is immediately dismiss anything that indigenous cultures do just because. And so, yes, we saw indigenous people have always done rites of passage, and they do help people transition and claim the mantles of adulthood or elderhood or leadership in so many ways. And we came along and said, well, we don't need that. And now we're wondering why we don't feel meaning in our lives, why we don't feel the touch of the sacred.
Mm.
Because we have decided that we can do without, yes, our very connection to the earth itself. And look where it's taking us. Disconnection, pain.
I mean, I would say, Keri, like, I, at this point, think, actually, did we give that up willingly, or was that taken from us by those in power? So, if people know who we are connected to our bodies, we are connected to earth, we know who we are, we're a lot harder
Mm.
to manipulate. And quite honestly, women post menopause have a lot of power if we
Oh,
understand that we have it. But do we know that? And so menopause is a dangerous concept, is it not?
what is all that fire for, right? I think about that all the time because in alchemy, which, that's the metaphor of my next book, everything is about burning things down. It's about putting it in the kiln. It's about putting it in the cauldron, really, right? Melting it down.
Mm-hmm.
And what is all that heat in our own bodies doing? It's for something. It's
Mm-hmm.
not for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right.
Gosh, and hot flashes, good God, they're annoying as hell, but
Yes. But it's heat,
we're all getting hot
and
flashes.
and heat is transformational like no other element.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, there, and that's not to say that, oh, now we should just really enjoy our hot flashes. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. It's just about
No.
understanding the symbols here and seeing that perhaps menopause has, exactly as you're saying, a greater purpose to remake us into better, stronger, more whole, more evolved, wiser human beings.
Amen, sister.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to Courageous Wordsmith. Today's episode featured Keri Mangis. You can read more about her and check out her links in the show notes. That's where you'll find my links too. Backstage at Courageous Wordsmith, our production team is the brilliant Brooke Roy and me, Amy Hallberg. You can subscribe to this podcast right on this page. Sign up for my emails and share with friends who want to write. And how about you? You have stories to tell. What if you let yourself tell them? What would that look like for you? I am Amy Hallberg, and until we meet again, travel safely.